How are y'all? Can y'all hear me? Oh, y'all are both muted.
Do you have, huh?
Good afternoon.
I don't hear anybody.
Dane, can you hear me?
I can hear you, Mike. You were muted, but now you're unmuted.
All right.
Good.
Hello, Harry. I think you're muted. There you go.
Click on mute back again. I'm gonna get that.
There we go. Can you hear me, Mike?
I can hear you, Harry.
Thank you, thank you. I'm not a participant anyway, I'm just an observer.
Hey, Elizabeth.
Liza, you're muted.
You're muted, Liza.
I'm on now. Hi, guys.
Good, you're good.
How are you doing?
How are you?
Good.
Fine, thank you. In one piece.
Yeah, can anyone see or hear me? It's Derry.
We can hear you, Derry, but we cannot see you.
You look like a levitating orb of light.
We gotta turn off the light. Yeah, it's still levitating. Obviously, my camera angle is off here. How to fix that?
You got to admire our lawyer getting all dressed up in a coat and in a tie there.
Yes, sir.
Hey, you know, James, I've been doing that for all of my stuff on Zoom for work.
Good for you.
Yeah.
Yeah, there we go.
But truth be told, this is just my costume that I teach all my online classes on.
Yeah.
And it's a clip-on tie.
Oh,
Well, I'll confess to y'all that I'm barefoot.
Yeah, me too.
Oh,
Wanda Brooks is on. Hello?
Hey, Wanda.
Oh,
Okay, I just want to make sure I was on. How are you all doing this afternoon?
Good.
Doing well.
Hello, Torrin Sanders here.
Hello,
Hey, Torrin.
Hello. Hello, Joe.
Hi, Joanne.
Oh boy. All right. You're about 1 minute, and so looks like we have a quorum. So in about 1 minute, we'll get started. All right, it's 3:30, and before I call the meeting to order, Jane, quick question. I know last meeting we had to take a vote on using Zoom for emergency reasons. Is that something that we have to do each time we open the meeting?
Yeah, I think so. I would, once you recognize that there's a quorum and call the meeting to order, that should be the first order of business.
All right, sounds good. So okay, we have a quorum, so the chair will call the meeting to order. First item of business would be to entertain a motion to hold the meeting via Zoom due to emergency situations.
So moved.
Seconded.
Second.
It's been moved and properly second to hold the meeting via Zoom due to emergency situations. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion carries. Thank you. Okay, now getting through the agenda. The first item on the agenda is approval of last month's meeting minutes. I hope everybody has had an opportunity to peruse those minutes. With that, Chair will entertain a motion to accept the minutes from last month's meeting.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and second to accept last month's meeting. Any unreadiness? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. All right. Next item on the agenda is the monthly report from the Office of Inspector General. Mr. Harper?
Good afternoon, members of the Ethics Review Board and anyone else listening in. We are in unprecedented times. I have not had an opportunity to do much, I would call it community outreach, and haven't had the opportunity because of our battle against this public health crisis to even see any of you in person for quite some time. So the first part of my report is simple. I want to join the chorus of people who have commended those public servants here in the city of New Orleans in particular, who have been a part of the battle to not only keep the virus from spreading.
Derry, I don't know if it's just me, but you're kind of cutting in and out. If you could maybe get closer to the mic, maybe.
And that's a good question. My mic is a little far.
I can't hear him either.
Can you hear me now?
That's better. Yeah, get as close to the mic as you can, if you don't mind.
Uh-oh, did we lose him?
Uh-oh.
Yep.
Yeah. No, he's still on.
Derry, you think you may have turned your video off?
I don't have him showing up as video or audio.
Well, I see D. Harper.
Yeah.
I
Nothing
think
next.
there's no video.
I don't see it either. I don't see his name either.
I see his name at the bottom if you scroll
He's
all
just
the way
now.
down.
There he is. There he
All
is.
right. Wait.
Derry, turn on your microphone.
You're muted.
Yeah, unmute your microphone, Derry.
Dane should be able to do that.
There you go.
Is that better? And can you hear me?
I hear you a little better now.
Well, I'm not sure. I'm not going to try to move my laptop, which is a little bit higher. But if you can't hear me, please just let me know. We'll do the best that we can. which is probably the best way for me to keep this short. What I was saying is I want to commend, as a public servant, all of the healthcare providers, our first responders, both fire and EMS, and in addition to that, of course, the NOPD. They are the true heroes of this time. I am just very, very happy to be able to say that I'm a member of the City of New Orleans as a public employee and a public servant. And that's what we do. In the annual report that we issued on March the 31st, I tried to set the tone that it somehow did not seem appropriate to be in a congratulatory, celebratory kind of setting, talking about how wonderful we were and how many things we accomplished last year. But the fact is, the law requires it, the public demands it. So that's what I want to do with the chair and the rest of the board's permission, spend just a little going over our annual report. I want to welcome new members of the board and first just go through some of the highlights of our monthly report, which we've been doing for a while. Can you still hear me and see me?
Yeah.
Okay, there's someone else moving. And then if you have any questions about that, with your permission, I'd like to spend some time just going through some of the highlights of the annual report, which we issued in March. With that, I'll proceed. Okay.
Mr. Inspector General, if we may, the way the agenda was put together was the monthly report initially, then the annual report. I don't necessarily have a problem with reversing those if the other board members are okay with it.
Okay here.
Is there any unreadiness with switching those, going with the annual report first?
Would you like to hear the annual report first? Is that correct?
Well, that's the way it looked like you were going, but it was opposite on the agenda. So I just wanted to make sure that we stay with the agenda. And it seems like the board is fine with going with the annual report first. So we'll do item 3 now and then item 2.
All right. We sent copies of the annual report to you within the last few days, so hopefully you're able to access them right now. I'm going to refer to what I'm calling the highlights of that report by page number, and my intent is to go through it fairly quickly. What I would ask any member of the board is interrupt me at any time if you have a question about a particular or comment or question about any of the other information contained there. So I will do that.
Excuse me, Gary. I would like to interrupt one more time, please, because again, you're going out, so I need you to be as close to the mic as possible. And I'm going to ask everyone else if you would please mute yourself, because sometimes you get bandwidth issues like that. So if you want to speak, go ahead and unmute, but while he's on, please mute. And I think that might actually help the bandwidth. Thank you. I'm sorry for the interruption, Derek. Go ahead and continue.
Yes, sir. Will you say that again? I'm not. So what is your suggestion? Mute while I'm talking?
No, I was asking everyone else to mute themselves for bandwidth situations. So now you can go ahead and go.
Okay. And I'm going to see if standing up helps at all. I think you can still see me. And it might help. I'm a little bit closer to my PC, which is on top of my desk. All right. Is that any better, Dr. Riggs? At least in terms of hearing me. Now you're muted.
Much better. Yes, go ahead.
Thank you. I prefer to stand anyway, but now you're gonna, some people have an angle and see how it's dressed. I've already spent just a few minutes talking about the Inspector General's statement. It's become a tradition in this office since I came, and really before, for the Inspector General to have an opportunity to make a comment about matters of some importance related to the operations and activities of the office. The mission of the office, as set forth, is well known. I'm going to pass over that. Our vision, of course, is to preserve public trust. That's our vision statement. And that's one of the reasons why I am very happy to say that even in the midst of the shelter and home, we've been able to continue to do our work. We spent a significant amount of time over the last year talking about our risk assessment, and this particular technical part of our operations and our responsibilities does not get enough attention. We conducted for the first time in over a decade, that is for the first time for the New Orleans Office of Inspector General, a system-wide risk assessment based upon best practices and standards. The reason that is critical is that resources are limited. We have to have not just a roadmap, but hard data to determine where, based upon that assessment, we should apply those resources in terms of audits and evaluations. The cooperation from the city, even during some difficult times, that is when the city was going through problems with information from their own information technology systems, was excellent, except for one outlier, which I could talk about for quite a while, but I won't mention in any more detail of our previous comments. At the end of that process, we applied the basic standards for risk assessment, which included categorizing things into particular sections. I'm now on page 5 of 16. And in a risk assessment that meets the standards and best practices, you look at the financial risk of operations, just call them departments, the operational risk as defined there. Compliance risk is one that I think is important. Many of the departments within the city have not been subject to an external audit evaluation by any entity for some time. The one I mentioned is in our work plans. It's not any secret, and that is the Orleans Parish Sheriff's Office. And then reputation, which is one thing because it's sometimes easier to explain to lay people. But reputational risk includes public input as measured or as demonstrated by the amount of attention the public has to a particular operation or department. And the Sewer Board has, of course, been at the top of that list. From this, I can't tell you a specific amount of information included, reviewing budgets, past audits and things of that type, and interacting with the members of that department. We developed from this system-wide risk assessment the work plan, which is a 2-year work plan. That work plan was issued in September for our new members of 2019 and included the risk, results, and entities that you see summarized on page 7. The Sewerage and Water Board came out on top, applying the factors in an objective manner. You'll see on the dashboard when we get to that from our monthly report that we are nearing receiving the response from the Sewerage and Water Board to our evaluation project associated with the Sewerage and Water Board's billing system. The Orleans Parish Sheriff's Office declined to participate, citing legal reasons. We're still researching that issue, but I can tell you, based on our risk assessment, that particular entity receives city funds, but has not been the subject of any outside audit by the Office of Inspector General for some period of time, even though they have in the past been the subject of audits or evaluations. We're also, as you can see, have other entities listed: the Orleans Parish Communications District. Obviously, finance would always come out because on top or near the top because it deals with money. The Department of Public Works has tremendous responsibilities for the city and the citizens of New Orleans, and on and on. The list of some of the areas we're looking into, go over to page 9 if you're able to keep up with me here. And at the bottom of page 9, we talk about corruption, lack of internal controls and things that obviously are important to determining which projects to do. So as of March 31st, when we issued the report, the projects underway are listed there. Actually, some of them have now been completed. The catch basin audit, the automated traffic enforcement evaluation of the billing disputes, I'll speak to when we get to the monthly report, audit, Audubon credit cards and expense reimbursements that is moving forward at due speed, and also the audit of the payroll and disbursements. And you can look at some of the projects that we started in 2020. That's again on page 20. We are subject, I'm referring you to page 12, to a quality assurance peer review. That's done every 3 years. Pursuant to the ordinance, that peer review is conducted by a team of veteran, accredited internal auditors, investigators, evaluators, and we will be back up for review in 2021. And of course, we have the Quality Assurance Citizens Review noted on page 13, and we're going through that process right now. And I'm going to skip around and take any questions that you have, because I'll go through the goals in some detail as needed. So, some of the items I'm sorry, I was giving you the wrong page numbers because I was using the annual work plan rather than annual report.
Can't hear you down there, Derry.
Yes, sir.
Can't hear you down there.
Okay. I said some of the page numbers, I'm sorry, I was giving you, I picked up my annual work plan. From the annual work plan, our annual report follows the same pattern, at least in terms of developing a document. It gives a summary of our activities. I may have a moment. I know we're going to have a meeting with the Quality Assurance Review Committee next week, but again, now I do have the right document. On page 15 of the annual report issued in March of 2020 is our summary of criminal prosecutions. The members of the board who served for some time know that my office, me in particular, are very reluctant to talk about criminal prosecutions or our involvement in criminal investigations, because such public disclosures of piecemeal information could do irreparable harm to the individuals that are the subject, or irreparable harm to the likelihood of successfully investigating and then prosecuting that. But on page 15 of our annual report are listed some of the noteworthy prosecutions that are at the point where there has been a public discussion or a public disclosure, usually by the prosecuting entity, the district attorney's office or the U.S. attorney's office. I noted just a couple, but what's listed as number 2, and can the members of the board, including the new members, turn to page 15 of the annual report. Annual report looks like this. I don't know if you can see it here. Picture of downtown. Do you have that?
Yes.
Okay. Anyone else? Okay. I didn't hear anything from anybody else, so I'll go on. Item 2 is something that's between an investigation and providing services to our law enforcement partners. We received a request from the New Orleans District Attorney General's office for technical assistance in reviewing and trying to obtain information from a camera that was in the taxi cab of an individual who was robbed by 2 people and also killed. One of our investigators, Kristen Morales, has several certifications in digital forensics, and she was able to assist the district attorney's office in getting data off of that camera that they had been unable to obtain. Using that dash cam camera, I guess, or internal camera information, they were able to charge the second suspect with, among other things, charged him with robbery and homicide in this 2017 prosecution. That's not at all unusual for us to provide assistance to another law enforcement agency or to use that expertise during the investigations where we are taking the lead. The other investigation, which got public notice, among others, was the October 29, 2019 indictment of Kevin Richardson. Mr. Richardson, as the press statement from the U.S. Attorney's Office noted, was a city employee in the Safety and Pertinence Office. During the investigation, he was found to have, based upon the grand jury indictment, taken bribes in order to aid and abet individuals who were trying to engage in unlawful activity, used the internet to assist in that, and he solicited and accepted bribe money for people who were seeking favorable inspection reports and certificates. I don't have to tell anyone on this call that in October of 2019, we as members of this community suffered a grievous event, and the families of those who were injured and killed when the Hard Rock Hotel construction site collapsed. However, in a letter that I sent to the mayor and to the city council in January, I referred to information received from public sources and from individuals at the mayor's office and the city council were about to undertake investigations of matters related either to that Hard Rock collapse or the continuing problems within safety and pertinence. My letters sent on 2 different dates to our elected officials simply asked them to stand down because we were concerned that any review or investigation they may conduct would impair our criminal investigation. That's what an inspector general's office is supposed to do, is at the times when it's necessary to disclose information or to have interaction with our elected officials and with the public, we do so, even in the midst of a criminal investigation. Now, I can't talk to you in any specifics about any other criminal investigations where we may or may not have federal or state entities involved, but I can rest assured you that we are working on those every day. The investigative team that we have is experienced. They're now led by Ed and Michelle, and with the help of our new general counsel, that's Patrice Harris Sullivan, we've been able to move those matters along, even though it does seem like it takes a long time. It really does. As a former assistant U.S. attorney, federal investigations, in particular white-collar crimes, this takes a long time to both develop, because the burden of proof, of course, is the heaviest in our legal system, and that is beyond a reasonable doubt. One last comment. I came into office extolling the value of our audit and evaluation work. Audits of operations and programs can have long-lasting value because we're pointing out deficiencies in controls and practices that cost money and are hard to calculate on a dollar basis on a day-by-day. We issued last year the Sewage and Water Board audit of their internal audit function. Among the findings was that the audit committee of the Sewage and Water Board had not met for over a year. They were providing no oversight of management or of the audit and evaluation process. The end result was obvious. There was no work being done. In fact, the work that was done, if you call it work, would not have met any of the professional standards that we live by day. The audit committee is now actively engaged in implementing some of the recommendations. The most serious of those was to hire a chief audit executive who would be able to develop staff policies, procedure, so that they would have, for $1 billion operation, an internal audit function that would also be focused simply on rooting out fraud, waste, and abuse. I am also disappointed to tell you that during our exit conference with the director, I interjected a question about where they are on hiring that chief audit executive. They've been unable to do so, having worked through and having had several attempts to resolve questions and issues raised by the Civil Service Commission. We are concerned, of course, that even after biting the bullet and expending additional funds to have an outside vendor come in and do some audit and review work, that having a chief audit executive is the key to getting some work done that would save money for all the citizens of this community. In addition, I am deeply concerned that after this period of time, that has not been able to be done for some of the reasons, at least that I'm aware of. Our office stands steadfastly with the Sewage and Water Board in this instance in insisting that using outside vendors, that is outside companies under contract, is good. But someone who is embedded in the process, who has the responsible oversight by the board and is not subject to interference by the management, is the optimal way for that to operate. Our audit determined specifically that management not only interfered with the office doing work, they wouldn't provide any information necessary for them to do work. That's about it.
Mr. Inspector General, can I ask, Mr.
Yes,
Chair,
sir.
would it be all right if I ask one or two questions on this point?
Go right ahead.
So, Mr. Inspector General, can you share with us, or can anyone on your team share with us any insights as to why civil service has not been able to get this done or to approve this? Do you have any specifics on what the hang up is or what the problem is there from the Civil Service Commission?
All right, Mr. Brown, I can give you a broad stroke response to that. As I understand it from my conversations before the one last week with the executive director, the civil service position is boiled down to its, I guess, least denominator. There are, in our current civil service arena, positions that could meet the responsibilities of a chief audit executive for the Sewage and Water Board. The reason that I would, if I'm asked, take exception to that is that first you'd have to have not only a position that would attract someone with, say, 20 plus years of experience and who in the private sector, even the public sector, could demand or command the kind of salaries that no position in the civil service arena could. But it takes a combination of experience and credentials in order to actually implement and start a new program. I'm not trying to talk just about myself, but I've done it before. I had good help, and it still was very difficult to start from scratch, which is basically what they're going to be doing. Now, I asked Mr. Gassan that question for a couple of reasons. One, I thought I might be asked today, but more importantly, we now have a responsibility to go back in and see if their statements about the board being actively engaged in reviewing and fulfilling their fiduciary responsibility, but also to see whenever that hearing is reconvened, have Mr. Gassan and the Sewage and Water Board know that we will be there prepared to present a case. It indicates that the chief audit executive there is positions in the civil service arena are not capable of meeting the demands that would be necessary.
Is this on the agenda for the next Civil Service Commission meeting? Are people pressing this? Are people, putting the appropriate pressure there to do what needs to be done to have this position recognized?
I do not know the status of the previous efforts. I know it's been set more than once because we were prepared to go at one time. Of course, now, because we are still under certain restrictions and precautions, I don't think the Civil Service Commission is having hearings. And I'd ask Larry Douglas if he's on the call to see if he can add any specifics to where Sewage and Water Board is at this time on this matter.
Good afternoon. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great.
We have one, sorry,
I'm sorry, Dr. Wicks.
the board member.
Mr. Douglas, I don't, just before you start talking, okay, I was gonna ask Mr. Harper a question. I don't know if Gary, are you still there? I guess I'm still unclear and trying to understand. If you could just tell us, what is the civil services issue with the auditor position? Is it a salary issue? Is it not recognizing the need for the position? I'm still not understanding.
I'll let Larry answer that question and also the one Mr. Brown posed.
Okay, so good afternoon again. With respect to your question, Mr. Shea, the first aspect of their, for lack of a better word, heartburn with the position is Sewage and Water Board is attempting to recognize the Chief Audit Executive as an unclassified position. The reason why that is because when one of the key elements of securing that position is the fact that the board needs to be able to hire and fire an internal auditor, determine the salary. The Chief Audit Executive reports directly to the board. They work in tandem with Mr. Kazan as the executive director. The classic case in civil service is because they have positions classified as a chief auditor under the classified status, that lends some protection to the chief audit executive in the case the board wants to take some action against them. The standards, the IIA standards, International Standards for the Professional Practice of Internal Auditing, specifically says that it's important that the CAE engage with the board such that they be able to tell them things in an unprecedented manner, key risk, et cetera, so that the board makes the determination and it's not driving with any interference from management. As the original report, as our internal audit report of the Sewage and Water Board reflected, they did have some interference with management, management telling them what to do, how to proceed, et cetera, et cetera. So that's one of the biggest dynamics with this position is the fact that Sewage and Water Board does recognize its importance. They're trying to get it classified as an unclassified position for that reporting structure, as well as some of the salary issues behind it, because in order to attract someone in that position and in that status, you want them to have the requisite credentials such as be a CPA, certified internal auditor, et cetera, so that, and they have that experience being a chief audit executive, so they can come in and do a holistic risk assessment approach, govern the internal audit function the way it's supposed to. So that's with respect to that position and that kind of engagement and battle with the Civil Service and Sewage and Water Board.
So it basically boils down to classified versus unclassified, whether or not the chief auditor position is going to be a classified or unclassified position.
Absolutely. And Civil Service is pushing back hard on it because they do have positions under a chief auditor in the classified series.
But the problem there is that if it's classified, there's only a limited amount of salary that would be authorized for the position. And so they can't attract the kind of person they need to have.
In part, but the main component is the fact that that civil service protection allows that chief auditor position to have civil service protections, even though the board needs to be able to govern in an unclassified way. So it's a delicate balance.
Well, let me just,
Who ultimately decides? Sorry, John. It just, I feel like we've been waiting for a decision on this issue for quite some time. And while we've been waiting for a decision on this issue, am I correct that there still is no audit function? That there's no audit process happening with the Sewage and Water Board, that the position is unfilled and no one's executing that process?
They have, not quite. They do have a contract auditor in place. It is undetermined right now whether or not they'll be able to renew his contract. He's on it for, I believe it was a 6-month period of time. He has not come up for renewal. I had a conversation with one of their executive team members the other day. Of course, Sewage and Water Board, like many other city functions, are facing financial constraints. So one of their biggest challenges right now is determining whether or not they're going to be able to renew this person under the same contractual agreement. In addition to that, they do have a person operating in a senior auditor capacity, but the crust of it is once they get a chief audit executive on board, that person, whomever is selected, has got a monumental task of being able to go through the process of assessing risk, doing a holistic risk assessment similar to what we did here in OIG, assessing all aspects of the Sewage and Water Board, determining risk factors, et cetera, so that they can develop a risk plan and an audit plan so that they can help improve efficiency and effectiveness within Sewage and Water Board.
Well, well, look, all I can do is speak as a member, just my own voice on behalf of the community. It is an absolute scandal that it has taken a year for this moribund Sewage and Water Board to get the internal audit function that it needs. With all of the problems that it's had, with all of the difficulties it imposes on everyone in this city, to be fiddling around, and for the Civil Service Commission to be fiddling around with this bureaucratic stuff while the whole thing is burning down is absolutely inexcusable. It is a scandal, in my opinion. And I would hope that the Inspector General and that other members of the public would shine a light on this and do what we can do to put the kind of pressure we need to bring to bear to get this agency the internal audit function that it so desperately needs now. Now.
Larry, does the ultimate decision-making lie with the Civil Service Commission? So we're just waiting for them to make a decision, or is there some other process that's just not happening?
Right now,
Okay, go ahead.
no, go ahead, Derek, if you need to say something.
I'll have to stand back up again. Hopefully I'm unmuted. The Civil Service Commission has the authority to make a determination here whether an unclassified position is created. The next step, should they rule against the Sewage and Water Board, would be a legal appeal of that to the first level of appeal here in the state of Louisiana. And I wanted to add an example of how important a internal audit function is the example that the Office of Inspector General started with the New Orleans Airport Board back in 2013. Under a memorandum of understanding where salaries and benefits of individuals in the construction fraud division there were paid by the board, a person reporting to the Inspector General, both investigators and it was potentially auditors, were able to create an environment there where both the executive director, the general counsel, and the person I'm going to call the chief operating officer extol the virtue of that function in giving them a basis for moving through this billion-dollar construction project with the fact that everyone knew that that function was there and operating. It included, and it's detailed in the annual report and in the quarterly reports of the construction fraud division. But what struck me when I met with them personally last year, is they want to continue that relationship with the Office of Inspector General. We haven't worked out the details, but one of their primary reasons is it deters. It's in that area of prevention. So we believe that the value of the internal audit function at the Sewage and Water Board would be increased in that specific, let's just say, intangible but very real area.
I'm going to recognize Liza, if I may, just interject. We've had discussions on this issue, and I think everybody understands the importance and would like to get something done on this. But clearly, there's also things that are clearly outside of our jurisdiction. And we have a long agenda and some other items to get to. So with that, I'm going to recognize Liza. If you have a question about that, fine, but I would ask as we move forward, unless there's something that we can do, or you're bringing up something that we can do either as a board or the Office of Inspector General to move this forward, I would ask that you hold those particular comments for the meeting as we can get through. Because again, we still have 7 more items to get through. So with that, Liza.
Thank you. Well, my question actually is exactly tied in with what you're saying, which is to ask Mr. Douglas or Mr. Harper, or both, what recommendation they have, what solution they see, and how we as a board can help.
Okay.
I'll take that, Larry. I'm sorry. I'll try. I'll endeavor to be brief if you can see me. During a previous meeting, you will recall that having heard some of the comments from the board, our office committed to opening a project related specifically to the Civil Service Commission, at least operations, et cetera. That's something that we can do. Of course, we will also be at the hearing to lend our, I'll just say it, subject matter expertise on those areas and point out what, in more detail, perhaps in written form, some of the points we've made today. So that's our approach for going forward, at least in dealing with the civil services role in that. I want to emphasize one more time that the crux of that audit, though, was a lack of oversight by the board, a breakdown in the structure, which was more dramatically shown in that audit committee did not work. Had they worked at their job and provided oversight, the audit function they had, which included professionals that could do that kind of work, wouldn't have been so easy a target for a management to simply say, don't do anything or we're not going to cooperate. And as Dr. Rick says, we have a lot to do, and I want to have just a few minutes, Dr. Rick, to go over and see if there are any questions about our monthly report. And then officially I'll be done, except to answer any questions.
Before we get to the monthly report, are there any other questions outside of the Sewage and Water Board issue or the civil service issue regarding the annual report, which is what's on the agenda right now? Are there any questions from any board members about that report? Okay, seeing none, we'll move to the monthly report for the Office of Inspector General.
Yes, sir. Dr. Ricks, in the interest of time, I will keep my additional comments short. I wanted to emphasize one thing. We always have, as a part of this document, administrative investigations. And that category, as we utilize it, means any investigation where, while there may be an allegation of misconduct, does not rise to the level of knowing criminal misconduct. And our administrative investigations continue to, at least in terms of the numbers and the kinds of matters that we're investigating, continue to expand. And the importance of those kinds of investigations to management, which has little or no investigative resources, at least not to do it according to the standards that we follow, that is document, 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 is very, very high. So our administrative investigations sometimes include small numbers in terms of the dollar value or the dollar saved, if we can in fact even calculate a criteria that is based on dollars and cents. But those investigations are extremely important, and while it's not directly reflected in this report, we continue to increase the number of complaints that we're looking at. Most of the complaints are in fact not either credible enough or sufficiently violation of policy, rule, procedure, or misconduct, or in fact we act as a clearinghouse for all of these calls that we get, and we're trying to direct people in the right direction. I can only do one more thing to toot our horn. We had kind of a coffee bet in the office as to which of our reports in 2019 would get the most attention from the public. I lost that. I owe everybody in the office a cup of coffee who entered into the friendly wager, because our traffic camera report garnered attention from every news outlet here. And at least in terms of the public response, we became the clearinghouse for people who wanted to know how they get their money back. In other words, the public had been concerned about that matter for some time. And again, I just want to commend the members of the team that were primarily responsible, including under Larry's leadership, for that particular project. If there are any questions about the dashboard or any of the current projects, we'll be happy to answer it.
From the board members, any questions regarding the monthly report for the Inspector General? Seeing none, I do have one, Mr. Harper. Looking at the dashboard, I see that the Sewer and Water Board is one.
I'm sorry, say again.
I was looking at the dashboard, and I see that the Sewer and Water Board was one report that. Can you hear me?
Hello?
Can you hear me? Can everybody else hear me?
I can hear you fine, Joe.
I can hear you as well.
Maybe you can answer for us, Larry. We see that the one report that you have that should be in the next 30 days or so was the Sewage and Water Board report. I see that this was, as we asked the reports to be done early, so it was a few weeks ago. Are any of those other reports now being able to move into that 90-day period, or they're still unknown?
Right now, Dr. Ricks, many of them are still unknown. We are trying to move them as best we can under the COVID restraint. We are working with Audubon to kind of move along the other two reports. We've had conversations where they are expecting to give us some of their responses back to us so we can go ahead and incorporate those into the draft stages of the report to get that finalized. With respect to the Sewage and Water Board, those responses are due back today. They're due back by close of business today. So we're hoping within the next week or two to get that report released. Other projects, as again, we're trying to move those slowly but surely, but under COVID, we've been having some kind of coordination, collaboration, scheduling to get some of the documentation we need, et cetera, but we're doing our best to move those forward.
Thank you. That's all I had.
Okay.
Okay. There are no other questions. Now we can move to the monthly report for the Independent Police Monitor. Ms. Hudson?
Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
All right, good deal. I am joined today by Deputy Police Monitor Stella Cement, who is over the complaint intake, review, and disciplinary hearing section, and also Acting Chief Monitor Bonsil Shokumbi, who is over our use of force section. She is acting because at this time all hires are on hold, and she is taking over for Tanya McClary, who went to become the police monitor in Dallas, Texas. We have had the last couple of months have been pretty busy for us. Complaints are up. Outreach in the community is up, primarily because of how COVID policing is turning out. There have been a number of groups that have reached out to us to express some dismay about checkpoints, about officers not wearing PPE, and just a number of other incidents. So we have been very busy. Stella and her team have been very busy with that. In addition, we've gotten in a couple of complaints about corruption issues in the NOPD, which we had not been seeing a lot. And over the last, I'd say 3 weeks or so, and Stella, correct me if I'm wrong, we've had 3 corruption issues come in, including the complaint that you saw about officers in the 8th District who are now under investigation, have been reassigned, and so on and so forth. So that's been troubling. So we've been very busy with that. In addition, towards the end of April and the beginning of May, we had 4 what we call officer-involved shootings, or OISs, 2 of them intentional, and I believe 2 of them accidental or negligent discharges. We had 3 officers shot and injured, some very painful and serious injuries, and a number of issues, of course, that we're looking at and involved in those officer-involved shootings. We have modified our normal monitoring of these situations due to COVID. So we do roll out to the scene, look at body-worn camera right then and there, but are limiting our exposure into the scenes and into homes if that's where these incidents occur. We're monitoring investigations as best we can. We're not going to hospitals or anything of that nature, just again, to limit our exposure at this time. But we're able to see a lot of what's going on and weigh in on these. Bonseal's been very busy watching interviews and giving input on those shootings. As we mentioned, we've heard a lot from our community about COVID policing, and we have been involved with a community-based coalition of over 30 groups that are looking at what's going on. And our goal in that is to get feedback from them about what they agree with and what they don't agree with. And then as public servants, provide information about NOPD's functions and data and so on and so forth. So we've been very involved in that and have written an op-ed piece and just been involved in that conversation, which has been very timely and relevant, and something that we're very proud of. And I thank Stella and Bonseal for being right in the mix on that. And we're going to continue to do that. And as we mentioned, a lot of complaints coming in. Stella's been busy with those. I think when you see next month's May's report, it's going to be something very similar. So, been very busy with that. And then we've also, as NOPD is trying to end this consent decree, and they know that to end it, you not only have to comply, but you also have to show the federal judge that you have a plan in place to continue to monitor, continue to audit, and continue to do that work to make sure there's no backsliding. So we've started engaging in conversations with NOPD leadership, especially Chief Ferguson, who has asked us to get in the mix here. So we are working with the Professional Standards and Accountability Bureau, which we really didn't work with too much before, but they do a lot of the auditing and reviewing for the consent decree. And so under prior administrations, that had not been a good conduit. And under Chief Ferguson, it is. So we are working with them. We're going to shadow their work. And between us, we're all going to put together an audit plan so that they'll do their consent decree work that they're required to do in certain time periods, but OIPM will also fill in some of the other gaps, looking at other issues. So, for instance, this issue has come up, our officers wearing PPE when they're encountering citizens. And that was an issue that had come up in a number of our complaints. So what we've been able to do is pull some body-worn camera, pick a sample, and start looking at that issue. And we'll have a report back in the next couple of weeks about what we're seeing on that. So we're trying to work with the police department here, and we're super excited about that. Because again, consent decrees are very, very costly and timely, and local leadership is necessary to continue those reforms. So we look forward to that. Did I forget anything, ladies, before I end our monthly report? You have the numbers, but if you have any questions about those, you can, of course, ask us. Did I forget anything else? Stella, Bonseal?
Oh, sorry, I just unmuted myself. But just to highlight that we did participate in a series of webinars during April with the Louisiana Fair Housing Action Center. And those webinars were an opportunity to speak with renters and landlords about the role that NOPD may play in any type of eviction, particularly any eviction during COVID, and inform those two groups how they should properly utilize the police, but how to notify us if there's anything problematic that comes from those interactions with the NOPD.
Thank you. Thank you. So yeah, we've been busy and we're trying to amplify. We're a small team, but we do a lot of work, but we can amplify our effect if we work with these other groups. And so we're trying to do that as much as possible. And with that, I will open it up to any questions you may have for me.
Are there any questions from any of the board members on the report from the Independent Police Monitor? Seeing none, I do have one question with regard to the corruption that you said that you found, that you're coming up with. It's clearly when you start talking about corruption in the police department, that does become quite concerning. So I agree with your concern to a great deal. The question is there, did you identify this kind of by accident based on something, that you have, or are some of your systems designed to identify that? I guess the question is, has there been some that's maybe been missed through the complaint process, or is there some other system maybe that might need to be looked at to find corruption?
Great question, and two parts to that. All of these complaints have come through our complaint process and members of our community coming to us about these issues. These complaints, and they're just allegations right now, but sensitive ones that we immediately get with the Public Integrity Bureau about, and then monitor from there. But your issue is the issue of how are we trying to troll for these issues in advance and be proactive is hampered by the cyber attack. So there's an early warning system that crashed, of course, after the attack. So, but prior to it crashing, we were having issues accessing that. And so now with this new coalition with the police department and them wanting us to be more involved in these issues, I do believe once it gets back up and running, we will have the access that we need to be able to see if it's operating efficiently and correctly. They have to be consistent. They have to look in those systems, but the systems also have to trigger at the right time. So those are all things we have experience in, and we look forward to weighing in on.
So if I understand you correctly, that system done right, that you do have a system in place that can kind of look at these things proactively a little bit, but because of the cyber attack, it's just not there now.
The cyber attack, and we didn't have access, but yes, there's an early intervention system, and there's also a supervisory log in which officers, supervisors log in lesser issues, but issues where they're having to correct officers or having issues with officers. And that'll give us a better feel for what, because that's internal. So that'll give us a better feel for what do the officers themselves see. So those two systems are very key.
Thank you, appreciate that. Any other questions or comments from any of the board members? All right.
Thank you.
Seeing none. Go to the next item on the agenda, and that is a vote for on using NACOL as the peer review. Dan, do you have any comments that you need to make regarding that MOU to the board before we vote?
Just unmuting myself. Yes, I mean, it's the NACOL proposal is attached to the agenda. And NACOL is the only, essentially, group that does this sort of peer review, and they're really new to it. I spoke at length with representatives from NACOL about this, and it really seems to be the only option here, unless we go with some private consultant, which would be perhaps a former police monitor somewhere, but this seems to be the best option to do the external peer review, and the terms are very reasonable, and they are making, now of course Susan Hudson serves on the board of NACOL, so they have they're aware of course, they're aware of that, and they're aware of the potential appearance of a conflict. So they are designating as the peer reviewers people who are not on the board and don't have a kind of day-to-day contact with Susan. Susan, do you have anything else to add to any of this?
Yeah, thank you, Dane. And thank you for reaching out to them. So one of the things that NACOL has done is, so we have about 200 members around the country. There aren't that many police monitors. You know, there are 19,000 police departments, but only in the 200 range of police monitors or commissions or whatnot that look at misconduct. So we are, most of those organizations are members of NACOL. And what we did in 2016, NACOL got a grant from COPS, the United States Department of Justice's Community-Oriented Policing Service, and took that grant to do a survey of the field and to write standards for oversight. And we are just reaching the end of that. And in fact, at the exact right time. So that will, once it's approved by COPS, which will be any day now, those standards are now sitting there for NACOL to use in this peer review. So nobody else has that information but us. Nobody else has garnered it, put it together, reviewed it, looked at effectiveness and best practices in police oversight. So it's coming at a great time, and I didn't have anything to do with that report. It is what it is. It stands, except we were interviewed as a member organization. So those standards were put in place, not by me.
Mr. Chair, a question if I could.
Yes, please.
Ms. Hudson, I'm sure you understand the concern about possible conflict of interest here.
Absolutely. And we knew that. So one of the things we do, and I'm the president of the board of directors for NACOL. And so our minutes of our meetings are on our website so that you can see how we're handling these things. When this issue comes up, I recuse myself and leave, and the board handles them without me because obviously there's conflict of interest here. I'm excited about peer review. I'm excited about them coming in and assessing us versus these standards that are best practices, because I think we're doing a lot of it, quite frankly. And I'm looking forward to also to seeing where we need to grow. So, so I'm not going to be, the board will handle any matters concerning this MOU without me being on.
So if we could, I'd like to just have crystal clarity on a couple things. One is that the visiting team that comes here will not include people that you've served on the board of NACOL with.
That's correct.
And also that they're also not going to be people that you have worked closely with in NACOL, although not on the board.
That's correct.
And you won't have any influence on who's chosen.
No, the board did that themselves, and there was a mishap in sending it over to Dane, but I believe in February's meeting, they voted, again, I was recused myself and was not on the call, and they voted with a list of possible peer reviewers and sent that list over with that. I had no input in it.
So,
and I discussed that with the folks at Russell Bloom and Nicholas Mitchell are going to be the review team, and NACOL assured me that those people that have not worked closely with Susan and aren't on the board, and the whole discussion in appointing those people was all centered around independence from Susan.
I must say I'm troubled if we are about to vote on something where the participants have already been chosen.
Well, they're not. I mean, this is a proposal that those people be on the review team. That's NACOL's proposal.
To us?
To us, that's right. I mean, and that's something that I did talk to NACOL about, because we didn't want to approve an MOU without knowing that the people who were going to do it were going to be independent.
So just to be clear, I'm all in favor of this with the proviso of those concerns that I went through before.
one thing I might add, I believe the ordinance for the Inspector General requires that the National Association of Inspectors General do its peer review. So the same risk presents itself there, because I'm not sure if Derry currently is on the board, but I think he has been on the board before. So that same concern, Mike, is there, and the way to deal with it is just the way that it looks like Nicole is addressing it, is to just have a completely independent group from that association.
Yeah, and this is just kind of a problem inherent to this. This is, as Susan said, there aren't that many police monitors around. It's a small community, and there's only one trade group, essentially. And it just happens to be that our Inspector General is very active in that trade group, which is a good thing, but it does present this problem. And I think that the proposal addresses it.
Any other questions or comments or before we bring the proposal to ask Dane to sign the MOU for a vote? Seeing none. Liza? Yes.
Just very quickly, I agree with the general sense of concern. I also agree that it's sort of a problem inherent, and I also note that I was not serving on the board at the time, but I do recall just as I was coming in that there was concern that the previous peer review were not actually peers, because there was no group set up to be a national organization that was of her peers. And so while this is an inherent problem, the other side, without having an organization, was also an inherent problem, that there was no peer review. So that's my comment to it.
Right, and the last peer review was when Susan was under the office of the Inspector General. So the reviewer there really was an Inspector General type reviewer, not a police monitor reviewer.
Correct.
It's going to be really interesting with the change in ordinance when we try to find a peer for us.
Yeah, and that's something that I was going to bring up in my report about, because it's time for us to look for a peer reviewer for us, but we could take that up next.
Yeah. So with that, the chair will entertain a motion to accept and execute the MOU from NACO for the peer review for the Office of Independent Police Monitor.
So moved.
Seconded.
Been moved and second to accept and execute the MOU. All in favor, vote by aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you all. If you don't have anything else for us, I'm going to go ahead and start my holiday weekend.
I think that's it. Enjoy.
Enjoy y'all's as well. Thank you.
Okay.
Next item on the agenda is the report from the ethics trainer, Hackett Group. Tony?
Okay, thank you. And Eric is joining us. Hi, Eric.
Everyone.
Hey.
Eric.
So our report for April is short, but as you can imagine, for April, we did not, for the month of April, we didn't schedule any or conduct any trainings, any ethics trainings. However, we did, and I think it's reported in here that we did contact the state, State Board of Ethics, and consistent with, some of the suggestions from last month, we talked to them about whether we might be able to offer the training online, and they sent back a note to say no, that since they do already offer it online, and that they're not really in a position to really sort of monitor that, and also to provide, if we wanted to provide certification, the annual certification. So I think we're just operating in a way where we think, although this is still a very gray area, that over time, maybe through phase 2, that things will loosen up and we'll be able to do more in-person training. So we are, as we reach out to the liaisons, and they are still, just about everyone in City Hall, they're still working primarily remote, and they're creating the plans for all of the different departments and agencies to begin to bring people in over some phased period, and all of the different departments are all doing things differently. And so in communicating with the liaisons, we will let them know that we will be able to provide them with, we're thinking, we can do a lot of the training in late summer, early fall, July, August, September, and sort of catch up, because I don't think that there's any possibility that the annual requirement would be waived in any way. So I think there's going to be a lot of catch up. There's going to be a big need for training toward the end of the year. And we know that we'll be able to support the liaisons with that. And so we anticipate doing that. We also thought through and talked about the different awards, the Torch Award and the Liaison Award. And I think that as we communicate to the liaisons, we're going to ask them about the Torch Award, but we'll probably not have that award. I don't know that we would really get an application this year, but we will continue with the Liaison Award. That's the award where it's really just the basic, award that is the checklist award, where they really work hard to make sure that everybody in their department or their agency or whoever they have purview over completes the annual training. And that they do as a liaison some additional training themselves, and they get the extra 2 hours of training. And by they're doing that, they're able to get that annual award. So I think that that's what's happened with us in April. And we continue to develop some new training elements, but the primary thing that we're looking at is trying to come up with some targeted training and support for the liaisons in the management training or leadership training. So we're looking at ways that we can do that. But I think initially, as the liaisons come back online, the key thing is their role, which is their central role, is to make sure that everyone in their agency or their department does receive the ethics training. Anything else, Eric? Did I?
Yeah, no, I think you hit it exactly. The only thing that I would add as a piggyback is due to the way that we normally conduct our trainings, we generally don't space them out evenly throughout the year. The way that it normally works is just kind of through the natural rhythms of government, where a lot of agencies have their internal requirement deadlines in May or in the late summer and early fall. And so although we haven't conducted lots of trainings this spring, that shouldn't put us too bad whenever the employees are able to meet in person again. Again, that's just kind of the natural rhythms of government. But then the other one too is building on the work that we did with the mayor's office and her senior staff at the very beginning of this year, to the point that Tony made earlier about being able to do more trainings for senior leadership. That's a good model that's worked. And in fact, we know that the mayor's office is interested in doing it again. So in terms of our focus on senior leadership, which we know has been an interest of the board, we plan to be able to do some additional building on that.
Yeah, and if the rhythm of your trainings goes like continuing legal education, people are going to be much more interested in getting it later in the year when they have to get their training done by law.
Yes.
So that's something to obviously advertise later in the fall and late fall as you all gear back up.
Yeah,
Call that the procrastinator effect.
Yeah, or
that's exactly right,
whatever you
Dave.
want to call it.
Yeah.
We can accommodate those. So that's it with the training. That's our report. Any other questions?
Any questions from the members? So I do want to ask one point of clarification, Tony. When you to the state about the online training, you typically talk about remote and Zoom.
Yeah.
Rather than, because I could see if somebody says online, they would think something different than remote. Because if you have 10 people on Zoom, it's almost like having 10 people in a conference room. So did you ask specifically about the remote?
The remote as opposed to virtual. I think I used the word virtual. As I have to just check the email, but when I talked with Erica, I think we used the word Zoom. That I did use that word. I can check again and really.
Yeah, I'll just ask that you follow up
Yeah,
on that.
actually,
to verify that.
Yeah, Tony, I think the word that you used was, will we be able to offer our in-person training through something like Zoom? Several of the groups that we usually train have asked about that.
Yeah.
That was the
I think
language
I
that
used
you
the word Zoom. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
I just read what you wrote.
So I think if I think for them, well, they're very short staffed. I can tell you that. They don't have, and just, for that office, I know that they would have to be able to make sure and review how we do that, have someone do that before they feel like they could give us, so that we could give people certificates. I think that's really where there's only really one person in their training division. And they do rely on this certified ethics trainers that, like us, to extend their training across the state. But they really there's only really one person who's overseeing sort of all of that effort. But we can, I'll reemphasize that and talk to the director also. So we can just try that again. I mean, because frankly, it might be something that they need to potentially think through, because this may last longer than I think.
Yeah, that's the question. You get another spike.
Yeah,
You're on this longer, then you're talking about an entire year.
Yeah.
Where the thing you want to offer is the online, which, so maybe just another kind of question to get them.
Okay. I'll push it a little bit. No problem. They're super nice. They're very, definitely will.
I concur with that as well. Thank you for raising it. And just a thought too that if they do have concerns, there might be workarounds. For example, is it a smaller sized groups or something like that? So I don't know what their concerns are, but there may be workarounds, and because I think it's important to continue to offer it, and also as our chair points out, that we don't know how long this is going to be going on.
Right.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. All right. There are no further questions from the ethics trainer. Thank you, Tony. Thank you for all the work that you do. Next on the agenda is our executive director's report. Dane?
Yes, first of all, complaints. We received a complaint just a couple of days ago, and I'll put it on the agenda for an executive session in June. Although I don't think it's anything that's going to be within our jurisdiction. It was a few city employees were upset about the way their director was responding to COVID and potential infection of employees. In any event, I didn't think it was anything that it's going to directly fall under the code of ethics, but I'm going to put it on the agenda for next time. Next is as we've already briefly talked about, we need to get a peer review of the ERB done this year. Right now it's May. I think we need to choose a peer reviewer in the next month or two and have the peer review done in early in the fall sometime. So I would just ask you all to start thinking about who might be a good peer reviewer for us. I would presume it would be someone who was formerly on an ethics board or an ethics administrator.
Dang, question. Would someone from the state board or the state office meet that requirement?
From the Louisiana Board of Ethics?
Yeah.
I think that is possible. We could have someone from the state board or associated with the state board do that, or a former member or a present member even, I guess. So that's certainly a possibility for someone close by.
They may
Yeah,
also have recommendations.
I'm sorry, say again, Liza?
Oh, I said the state board may also have recommendations for peer reviewers.
Yeah.
Yeah. Dan, would you reach out to the state board on that, please?
Yeah, I will. Yeah, and if anybody else has any ideas in mind, please call me or email them to me. What I would anticipate is coming to the board in June with some ideas and specific types of people, and then probably vote on it in the next meeting on who to. I'll put together a draft MOU for us to then reach out to someone to do the peer review.
Sounds good.
So that's the complaints. That is the peer review. The other thing I wanted to just mention to everyone is that next week there is going to be the meeting of the Quality Assurance Review Advisory Committee for the OIG. It's going to be done probably by Zoom. On Monday, Mr. Blumenthal and I are going to talk to see if it's feasible to try to do this at City Hall. The committee would really like to do it at City Hall, but I don't think it's going to be feasible. I think the odds are great that it's going to be done just like this on Zoom, and I will set up the Zoom address and send it to everyone on the board. You don't have to be there, but you're certainly more than welcome, of course, to attend. I would imagine that public hearing is going to take an hour or two or something like that. And then at our next ERB meeting, if the board was interested, we would have perhaps Mr. Blumenthal come report to us directly about what his committee did, and then give Mr. Harper a chance to respond. Again, that's completely up to you all, but that's I think those are the next steps on the Quality Assurance Review Advisory Committee.
Yeah, I think that's the way we did it last year. They had their public meeting, and then we had at the next board meeting, we had both anybody from the oversight committee that wanted to address us, and then of course, Mr. Harper to address us as well.
Yeah.
So, and then that's the chance for the board members to give their input about it.
Right. So I presume it's kind of the will of everyone just for me to invite Mr. Blumenthal to come to the next ERB meeting in June, and I'll put it on the agenda and give Mr. Harper a chance to respond. Does anybody have any kind of problem with that?
And I would just recommend opening up the invitation to all three of the members of the oversight
right, sure.
body. Yeah.
Good. Okay. Well, I'll do that. I'll put that item on the agenda for June.
I do have a question related to the complaint that you received that you mentioned. Is there any deadline or under the rules by which we need to respond, whether it's to say we don't have jurisdiction or we do?
I responded to them as soon as I got it and told them that I've received the complaint. But as far as us, I'm not sure. I didn't put it on the agenda for today. The next opportunity to do it is in June. So
I don't think there's a deadline, Dane, on that one where you recused yourself, and I sort of shepherded that when I remember looking at that issue, and I don't seem to remember there being a deadline.
Yeah, well, I mean, here we are, so we can't do it today, so we're going to do it in June for sure.
I mean, if there were a deadline, I suppose we could do some sort of a special meeting and go into executive session and so on and so forth. But if there's no deadline, then I completely agree. I don't recall whether there's a deadline off the top of my head, so I just was asking.
Okay.
So we can check that.
Yep. And that's all I have to report.
All right. Okay, next item on the agenda, report from officer nominations. James?
So, Mr. Chair, if the chair would entertain a motion for a proposed slate of officers, I'd be prepared to make a proposal.
Yeah, the chair will entertain a motion for a proposed slate of officers.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to propose to make a motion for a vote that the officers for the coming year would be Michael Cowan as chair, Liza Calderon as vice chair, and Monique Doucette as our secretary.
It's been moved. Is there a second?
Second.
There's a second. Any unreadiness or discussion? Liza?
Because I'd like to, as much as I like the slate, are we asking to vote on that slate now?
I think so, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Then I don't think, that's not what's on the agenda. So I think, you know, as Dr. Cowan taught me early in my tenure here, if it's not on the agenda, we need to at least have a unanimous vote to put it onto the agenda, to amend the agenda, to take it up, you know, announce it for what it, you know, with the reasonable specificity, you know, name who it is, and then take a vote. So first vote on the option. I think
I understand what you're saying.
Thank you.
The chair will entertain a motion to adjust the agenda to vote on officers for the next year.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Yes.
Been moved and a second to adjust the agenda to vote on officers for next year. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries. Right. So now, and with that, James, I think
Probably better let me make the motion again.
well, and we're gonna have to do it a little differently because I think as Liza put it out, I don't think it would be proper to vote for a slate. I think we will have to go one by one.
Okay, I'll move.
I don't, well, that may or may not be true. That's not what I meant to say.
That's not, okay.
I only meant that we should name the people. That's all.
Okay.
In the motion, but anyway. So but I think.
Okay. So if we can go with a slate, that's fine. All right. The chair will entertain a motion at this point.
Mr. Chair, I would move that the ERB vote on the slate of officers for the coming year of Mike Cowan as our chair, Eliza Calderon as our vice chair, and Monique Doucette as our secretary.
Is there a second?
Second.
Been moved and second. Are there any unreadiness? Seeing none, all in favor of the proposed slate of officers, vote by aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries. Congratulations on our new officers. That will take effect for the July meeting.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, if I could just say a word, I wanted to thank everyone for their support. I'll work at this. And I'd like to acknowledge Dr. Ricks. He and I have worked very closely for, I want to say maybe 4 years, Joe, or 5 years on the education and honoring people with those ethics awards. And you know, we are where we are. We had a wonderful beginning last fall, but we are there because of Joe's relentless leadership on that. And also, Joe, I just think you did a terrific job as chair of the board, and I wanted to thank you.
Hear, hear.
Hear, hear.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. It's been good, but one more meeting, so I'll save this for next meeting. Well, at least one more. We'll see what the mayor does for reappointments. But one more as chair. So, but thank you for those comments, Mike. It means a lot to me.
Given that James is still sitting here, we might be seeing your face on Zoom for a long time.
You may not be going anywhere anytime soon.
Right.
All right. Well, I guess my time concern was not as bad as I thought it was earlier. We have been able to get through the agenda in the allotted time. So the chair will entertain a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved and second. All in favor for adjournment, vote by aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Meeting adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks,
All right,
everyone.
bye-bye, everybody.
Congratulations, Dr. Cowan, Dr. Ricks. Thank y'all.
Bye now.
Thank you.
Very much.
Yeah.